The story starts in a hall where 3 pairs of boots shook the ground as they marched. The sound echoed through the arena like war drums. There was no announcement, no warning, just shadows moving through the smoke, stepping into a world that wasn't ready for the carnage they were about to bring. Nobody saw it coming. Yet once they appeared, the balance of power shifted forever. They weren't bound by friendship. Their bond ran deeper than camaraderie, deeper than survival. It was bloodless kinship forged in violence, a unity that needed no words. They carried themselves like soldiers without a general, 3 fragments of a single weapon. Together, they conquered giants, toppled legends, and delivered their form of justice by any means necessary. The crowd was forced to watch as a new order was born. But bonds that strong don't die quietly, they shatter. And when they shatter, they leave scars that never heal. 1 chair shot, that's all it took. Steel struck bone, and the echo was louder than the cheers, louder than the commentary. The crowd gasped in disbelief because what fell on the ground wasn't just bodies, it was brotherhood. The scar of that betrayal gave birth to a monster. He cloaked himself in family, turned blood into obedience, fear into currency. He built the bloodline not just as champions, but as a dynasty that could not be touched. He carried himself like a warlord who commanded loyalty through fear, through respect, through the sheer gravity of his aura. The tribal chief had arrived, and when he demanded acknowledgement, the world had no choice but to kneel and raise their hands. Years later, another echo of that same sound filled an arena. A chair gripped in trembling hands, hesitation carved into every second, until loyalty finally snapped. The strike landed across his back, the same betrayal, reborn. In that instant, the empire cracked. A soldier walked away, refusing to follow orders. The foundation was no longer unshakable, but the empire was built on blood, and blood was supposed to hold the line where comrades and strangers had failed. Yet even family fell. The throne he carved out of dominance became the very crown that poisoned his kin. One cousin who once pledged loyalty raised his hand in defiance, walking away when ordered to strike. Another, the brother he trusted to stand at his side, kicked him down in the heat of war and left him sprawled in the dust. It was no outsider's blade this time, no mercenary's chair. It was betrayal written into his own bloodline. Fists that once fought for him now swung against him. Voices that once crowned him now called him tyrant. The family crown remained on his head, but it sat crooked, built on fractures that no victory could mend. The empire did not fall in one night. It was chipped away, carved out by the very hands that once protected it. His crown, that symbol of dominance that had survived wars with brothers and blood, was finally ripped away beneath the brightest lights. On the grandest stage, after years of defiance, the weight of betrayals gathered into one crushing moment. The champion who once seemed untouchable was pinned, his reign broken, his aura cracked. But thrones are rarely left empty. In the ashes of his defeat, another rose, not an outsider, but the monster he had unknowingly created. The silent enforcer, the one raised in his shadow, stepped forward. The empire's youngest blood seized the scepter, not by honor, but by carving the old king out of his own dynasty. The usurper did not need to build an empire. He simply claimed the one already written in blood and sacrifice. The man who had been called tribal chief now stood dethroned, staring into the eyes of the cousin who carried his crown as if it had always belonged there. Yet the deepest cut did not come from steel or from blood. It came from the voice that once built him, the man who had shaped his legend with words as sharp as swords. The prophet, his wise man, the one who had stood at his side through triumph and ruin. At last, even he stepped away. His silence became betrayal, his allegiance shifting to the new king. The same tongue that once crowned him now whispered loyalty to another. And so, the reign that had survived comrades, brothers, and blood finally collapsed under the weight of the man he trusted most. The empire was lost, the crown stolen, the voice of his greatness gone. This is the story of a man who conquered the world, only to be stabbed by the ones he called family. A man who wore the crown that broke brotherhoods and tore apart bloodlines. This is the story of the man the world betrayed. This is the story of Roman Reigns. 3 shadows entered the arena in 2012, boots pounding like thunder, cutting through smoke and chaos. Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and Roman Reigns, the Shield. They weren't presented as men. They were introduced as a weapon, a machine built to impose order through destruction. Chairs cracked, tables splintered, legends fell in heaps beneath their 3-man assault. At the spear point stood Roman, taller, broader, quieter than the others, His silence carried menace. The Superman punch and the spear weren't just finishers. They were executions, closing the book on icons like John Cena, The Undertaker, and CM Punk. The Shield's dominance was absolute, and Roman's presence gave it weight. But brotherhood turned to greed. In June 2014, a steel chair smashed across his spine, and Seth Rollins' betrayal echoed through an era. Dean Ambrose screamed, Roman crumpled, and the greatest faction of its time was gone in a heartbeat. That chair didn't just break the Shield, it marked Roman's first scar. The sound of steel against bone became the ghost that followed him into every arena. The company saw opportunity. With the Shield gone, Roman was chosen as the future. WWE thrust him into the spotlight, scripting victories, handing him title shots, wrapping him in the mantle once worn by Cena. His rise was written in boardrooms before it was earned in rings, and the audience could smell it. At first, the cheers were real. He was fresh, explosive, a powerhouse who felt like the future, but the tide turned in 2015. When Roman won the Royal Rumble, eliminating Daniel Bryan early, the Philadelphia crowd drowned him in hatred. Even The Rock's endorsement couldn't save the moment. What was meant to crown him cursed him instead. From then on, every push felt like punishment. Main event after main event, the boos only grew. Chants of Roman sucks and you can't wrestle swallowed his promos. To fans, he wasn't a hero rising. He was the handpicked corporate statue planted in their path. Still, WWE pushed. He headlined WrestleMania after WrestleMania, fighting Lesnar, Triple H, Undertaker. He even pinned the dead man at WrestleMania. A victory meant to immortalize him. Instead, it poisoned him further. The next night, fans refused to let him speak, booing for nearly 10 minutes until he muttered,
"This is my yard now."
It was supposed to be triumph. It felt like exile. Roman's ability was never in doubt. His matches were brutal, his aura undeniable. But his story wasn't his own. Every step felt dictated, every victory scripted in advance. The audience didn't reject his skill. They rejected the machine that forced him down their throats. By 2018, the divide was unbridgeable. Roman had main evented WrestleMania 4 straight years, but the people only grew colder. They booed his entrances, hijacked his promos, cheered his enemies no matter who they were. The Shield had once made him beloved. Now, he was resented. The spear point of justice had become the corporate spear thrust against the fans' will. This was Roman's beginning. Betrayed by his brother, rejected by the crowd, burdened by a crown he hadn't asked for. He had the look, the bloodline, the tools, but none of it mattered. Roman Reigns was a soldier marked by betrayal, drowning under the weight of a throne the world refused to let him wear. In 2018, just when the weight of rejection seemed permanent, fate struck harder than any opponent. Roman Reigns stood in the ring on Raw and uttered words that froze the arena. He was battling leukemia. The crown he had never fully worn was stripped away overnight. Fans who had booed him for years wept, because in that moment the corporate machine vanished and only the man remained. Roman left the ring, his future uncertain, his career in question. When he returned in 2019, the cheers were real for the first time in years. But that sympathy softened too quickly. Within months, he was back in the same battles, fed through the machine, facing boos once more. Then the pandemic hit, and Roman disappeared again, choosing his health over the risk of empty arenas. When he came back in August 2020, it was no longer the same man. Gone was the silent soldier or the corporate puppet. What emerged was the tribal chief. Aligned with Paul Heyman, Roman carved a new kingdom out of cruelty and dominance. He demanded acknowledgement, and this time, he took it by force. Jey Uso was the first sacrifice. Roman broke him down in brutal matches at Clash of Champions and Hell in a Cell, forcing his cousin to utter, "I quit," while his brother begged for mercy. From there, the bloodline was forged not in unity, but submission. Jimmy followed, unwilling at first, until Roman's grip tightened around both brothers' throats. Together with Heyman and later solo Sikoa, they became an empire that towered over WWE. Roman's reign stretched across 1,316 days. He conquered everyone: Edge, Daniel Bryan, Brock Lesnar, Drew McIntyre, John Cena, all fell before the tribal chief. His throne was built on dominance, his aura untouchable, but the cracks were already written into the crown. The first cut came from within. Sami Zayn wormed his way into the Bloodline, desperate for belonging, wearing their shirt, calling himself Honorary Uso. Roman mocked him, tested him, humiliated him, and yet Sami stayed. He bled for Roman until the night of the 2023 Royal Rumble. Kevin Owens lay beaten, handcuffed, his skull about to be shattered by Roman's chair. Roman demanded Sami deliver the strike. Instead, the steel bent against Roman's back. The arena erupted. The king fell to his knees, betrayed not by an enemy, but by the fool he had let into his court. Worse still, Jey Uso refused to finish Sami. He turned his back and walked away, leaving Roman exposed. A cousin once beaten into loyalty now rejected him outright. The second cut was deeper. By SummerSlam 2023, Jey challenged Roman in tribal combat. The match was brutal, bloody, and near its end, Jey had victory in his grasp. Then came betrayal from the one he trusted most, Jimmy. A super kick to his own twin's head shattered the dream. Roman capitalized and retained, but the cost was obvious. The family bond was destroyed. The bloodline no longer felt unshakable. It was fractured, poisoned by Roman's crown. What followed was a civil war. Jimmy and Jey turned against him, their brotherhood stronger than their allegiance to the tribal chief. Roman still held the championship, but each defense came with less family at his side, more whispers of rebellion around him. By WrestleMania 40, the dynasty was crumbling. Cody Rhodes stood across the ring, flanked by Seth Rollins. Roman brought every weapon he had, Solo, Jimmy, the stipulation of bloodline rules. But the ghosts he had created came back to haunt him. Cody delivered the final crossroads. The referee counted 3. After 1,316 days, the tribal chief's reign was over. Roman lay on the mat, staring up at the lights, the empire he had ruled collapsing around him. The betrayals of Sami, Jey, Jimmy, and now the echo of Rollins had all converged. The man who demanded acknowledgement was left in silence. The end of empires rarely comes from the armies outside the walls. It comes from within, when the blade is raised not by strangers, but by those who swore fealty. Roman Reigns learned this truth in the cruelest way. Solo Sikoa had once been silent. The youngest cousin, the unspoken enforcer, a weapon Roman used to cement his dominance. He obeyed every order, never hesitating, never questioning, but silence is its own hunger. By the time Roman's 1,316-day reign crumbled at WrestleMania 40, Solo no longer looked like a soldier. He looked like a king in waiting. The very cousin Roman had elevated became the one to drag him down. Solo stepped forward, claimed the mantle, and crushed the tribal chief beneath his heel. Roman was no longer the figure demanding acknowledgement. He was the relic of a dynasty already moving on without him. But Roman was not finished. Pride and fury carried him back into the fight, and eventually, he carved out his revenge. But then came the deepest cut. At WrestleMania 41, Paul Heyman, the wise man, the voice of Roman's empire, the one who had turned dominance into scripture, revealed his final treachery. In the decisive moment, he struck low, leaving Roman doubled over in shock and pain. The man who once called him my tribal chief handed the crown not back to family, but to an old enemy. With the whole world watching, Heyman raised Seth Rollins' hand high, declaring him the new chosen one. It was not just a betrayal of loyalty, it was the rewriting of history. The brother who had shattered the shield 10 years earlier was now crowned by the same voice that had once knelt before Roman. Heyman's treason was not loud, it was calm, calculated, lethal, a whisper that toppled an empire. Roman left WrestleMania 41 not with blood on his chest or gold on his shoulder, but with emptiness. For the first time in years, he had no titles, no family, no counsel. The throne was gone, and so was the empire. What followed in 2025 was a ghost journey. Roman returned, but without purpose. He walked into arenas with the aura of a man who had once ruled, only to drift through segments without meaning. More comebacks than matches, more appearances than victories. A legend haunting his own legacy. Fans cheered his returns, but each time, the spark faded. He wasn't the soldier of the shield or the ruler of the bloodline. He was a man wandering, directionless, the weight of betrayal crushing every step. The bloodline, once his creation, thrived without him. Lightweight Umaga stood tall, running his own bootleg bloodline. Jimmy pursued his own battles. Jey became a crowd favorite and held the gold. Even Sami Zayn, once the jester, had carved a story of redemption. Everyone who left him found new life. Roman was the only one who remained trapped. By the end of the year, His matches could be counted on one hand, each less significant than the last. The tribal chief, the head of the table, the longest reigning champion of a generation, reduced to sporadic appearances, each one met with nostalgia rather than fear. His aura had not vanished, but it no longer commanded. It lingered, a reminder of what was, not what is, and that is the cruelest betrayal of all. Not Seth's chair, not Sami's strike, not Jimmy's super kick, not even Heyman's abandonment. The world itself betrayed him. Fans who once demanded his downfall moved on, chasing new heroes, new villains, new stories. The same audience that booed him for years, then finally bent the knee during his reign, now watch as the legacy of wrestling's most dominant man crumble in indifference. Roman Reigns became a man without a war. The Shield's betrayal taught him to fight alone. The Bloodline's fracture showed him family could not be trusted. Heyman's turn at WrestleMania 41 proved even voices sworn to him could abandon him. But in the end, the silence of 2025 was the harshest lesson. The roar of the crowd no longer belonged to him. The kingdom he built was alive, but its king was forgotten. So he walks now, directionless, carrying the echoes of a reign that defined an era and the scars of every betrayal that ended it. Roman Reigns, the chosen soldier, the tribal chief, the empire builder, reduced to the man the world betrayed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and click on one of the videos on your screen right now to keep the journey going.